All right. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Midwifery Advisory Council meeting. I'm Carrie Sparavon. I chair this committee. I'd like to remind everybody to either turn your phones to vibrate or turn them off. The meeting is being webcasted. If you'd like to provide public comment, please fill out a speaker slip in the back and give it to Ms. Sewell. Ms. Sewell, could you please identify yourself? There she is. And I would also like to remind everybody, if you're giving public comment, could you please state your name for the record before you begin speaking, even if you're speaking from your chair. I'd now like to call this meeting to order. Ms. Lowe, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Byrne?
Present.
Ms. Ehrlich?
Here.
Ms. Marcelin?
Present.
Ms. Webster?
Here.
Ms. Yaroslavsky?
Present.
Ms. Sparavon?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. The next agenda item is public comment on items that are not on the agenda. Do I have anyone wishing to comment on things that are not currently on the agenda? All right, seeing none, let's move to our next agenda item. Agenda item 3 is approval of the minutes from the March 27th, 2014 meeting. As any edits to the minutes should have been provided to board staff prior to today's meeting, Ms. Lowe will provide us with the committee's requested edits, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you. On page 4 of your packets, the members of the audience list reflects Diane Holzen, and this will be corrected to reflect Diane Holzer. On page 10 of your packets, in the 7th paragraph from the top, the sentences that state, in the working group Dr. Gregg participated in, it was a hospital to board and CMQ-CC form. The hope was that the board could use this information for peer review. Those sentences will be edited to reflect, in the working group Dr. Gregg participated in, the intent for the form was that it would be a board and CMQ-CC form with the hope that the board could use the information for peer review. Just clarifies what's currently listed.
Thank you.
Also on page 15 of your packets, in the first paragraph of agenda item 8C, the acronym listed for American College of Nurse Midwives is listed as ACNW and should be reflected as ACNM. These changes have been reviewed by board staff and the edits will be made to the minutes.
Thank you. Does anyone else have edits to the minutes that they'd like to bring forth?
I do not necessarily have edits because I'd just like it on record that I did not receive this until late last night and then had to leave my home early this morning. So I have not had a chance to review them. I have no idea whether I would have edits.
All right. Is there a motion, given Karen's concern, to approve the minutes, or do we need to append it to the next meeting?
I would move to approve the minutes and any changes that need to come forward should come forward at the next meeting.
Okay. Second.
Well,
All in
if
favor?
you wait. If you haven't reviewed them, then you can't vote to approve them. You can abstain.
I see. I abstain.
So you can't second. So we need a second to the motion.
Dr. Byrne has seconded. All in favor?
Wait. We need discussion among members and public comment,
Any discussion among the members on the minutes?
if any.
Okay. Any public comment from the audience? Okay, seeing none. All in favor of approving the minutes? Aye.
Aye.
Abstentions?
Aye. Abstention.
Any negative? No. All right, the minutes are approved as edited. All right. So the next item is the chair's report, which I will read from my notes. AB 1308 made groundbreaking transformations to the Licensed Midwifery Practice Act of 1993. with the removal of physician supervision from the requirements of legal practice for licensed midwives in California. There are still many points remaining to be fully implemented through regulations. Specifically, I'm looking forward to board staff noticing an interested parties meeting in the near future to implement the changes to BP 2507 regarding the need for physician interface or referral. I'm hoping that will be upcoming this fall. Last week, the board held an interested parties meeting to discuss the transfer of planned out-of-hospital delivery to hospital reporting form that the board created earlier this year. There was a lot of input from members of the working group that had been formed by interested parties earlier in the year, as well as input from licensed midwives that were in attendance on their experience with hospital transfers since the form was created. There were many concerns put forth by licensed midwives regarding the accuracy of the completed forms. Many individuals reported that physicians were unable or unwilling to accept their verbal report. A number of maternity units didn't copy the records provided by the midwife. There seemed no clear mechanism for the midwife to interface and provide information to neonatal intensive care physicians and staff when the infant was the one who was transferred. And many hospitals continue to be unaware of the form at all. All of these difficulties caused concern among the midwifery community that submitted forms would contain inaccurate, missing, or incomplete data. The legislative intent of reporting hospital transfers was to provide information with the goal of improving these transfers. Thorough gathering of data, specifically on how transfers occur, why they occur, and what information is provided to the physician receiving care of the transferring client is imperative to this goal. The current form and instructions have been in place only a few months and were implemented out of need without the benefit of regulatory hearings. It is clear from licensed midwife reports that many hospitals don't know about the requirement of clear procedures in place for gathering the information required on the current form. Because of this, the submitted forms have the potential to generate investigations of licensed midwives and physicians that are based on incomplete or inaccurate data. There is a very real cost of staff time to investigate and provider time to correct this inaccurate data if an investigation is begun. The board has, many times in the last few months, stated that it was only required to include data elements on the form that were dictated by statute in the absence of full regulatory hearings. Given the difficulties currently being reported, I would like to encourage staff at this time to remove all the names from the reporting form until proper procedures are put in place through a full regulatory process for gathering and reporting the data in as accurate a manner as possible. Continuing to ask for the name of the hospital submitting the form could be valuable, as it could assist in educating hospital staff, physicians who work there, and licensed midwives who transfer clients to a particular hospital that is deemed to have difficulties with transfers without unduly generating investigations of providers that turn out to be based on inaccurate information. I continue to appeal to all licensed midwives to remain active with your representing body, the California Association of Midwives, and continue to attend the Midwifery Advisory Council meetings. Your input to both is invaluable. Lastly, carry on the work of providing high-quality, evidence-based care to women, babies, and families. Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the MAC on this? Dr. Byrne?
Yeah, I just had a question. Was there advocating dumping data and forms acquired to date or scrubbing the data?
No, I'm not. I wasn't advocating scrubbing anything we already have. The concern is that we move forward with a form that is imperfect and in process, with procedures that aren't in place in hospitals for gathering the data that's required on the form. The board then gets that form with midwives and physicians' names on it and may need to begin investigations based on information that's on the form, which by all reports may be completely inaccurate. So it's kind of a spinning of wheels here at the board when we don't have all of the procedures in place to ensure that the data we're collecting is as accurate as possible.
Okay, and I respect and hear the concern. I'm sure other people in the audience also have similar concerns. Just as a help, maybe for a bit of context, usually when systems of new data reporting are implemented, there's a lot of thought going into the processes. There's a lot of like smart people who argue how to do the process. It's educated, it's rolled out, it's implemented, and even with all that work, the first 6 months, first 2 years of data collection, are going to be like pretty haphazard. So I would hope people realize that for any kind of data reporting, that's actually kind of the norm. Best plans will result in an evolutionary process that you only start improving your data as you start collecting it, and you realize it has errors, and then you correct the processes. So I would recommend continuing to retain all data already acquired and any irregularities that are noted rather than spurring investigations of individuals. Use that to spur opportunities to improve processes.
We've been told that the board probably doesn't have the ability to do that,
Improve the processes?
to not open an investigation.
Sure, but I'm not, again, I don't think the investigation process is that daunting, because usually it means an administrative person has reviewed and quickly could ascertain that this is a data collection error. And I'm basing that both having partaken in investigations from the medical board side and realizing that the value of the process and allowing investigations to occur is to not seek to point fingers at individuals, but actually to look at improving the systems as well. So I would think there's an opportunity if there's things coming through that are erroneous to say, oh, this is how we're going to make it better as a system. Just a counterpoint. I do respect the point, and I definitely want to make sure people feel secure and trusted. But sometimes the only way to improve the process is they have the process warts and all move.
I understand that. What my suggestion would be to continue to collect the data, minus the names, till we've finished the regulatory process, so that, because what you started with, that usually, even though there's lots of thinkers on it and lots of processes in place, you're still going to get erroneous data. We don't even have that at this point. Hospitals haven't been trained. They don't, many of them even, we don't know whether these reports are being generated 2 or 3 weeks after an actual incident by somebody who wasn't even a party to the incident. And if we waited to put names on it until we actually had regulations in place that instructed the hospitals how they're going to collect the data, then we might be saving ourselves a lot of footwork that's unnecessary.
And a lot of grief. And I also would like to just add, I know that we are making a lot of headway in the relationships between midwives and the medical people with whom we have to interface. There is, though, still a great deal of history in the state of California of a lot of prosecution that has amounted to, at times, harassment. And I think that the midwives are already leery of this whole process because of the potential for increased investigations that might or might not be warranted. And because of that, I am going to move that the recommendation of the Midwifery Advisory Council be to the medical board that all names be removed from this form until such time as we have good processes and understanding of the system while still collecting the data involved.
Barbara?
So I'm not going to get into the discussion about the form. What I'm going to get into the discussion is on how we can do better about informing the partners that we need to have and work with to be better and more understanding of the process and the system. So that I would recommend that staff be asked to report back to us on their engagement with the hospital associations, for example, with specific newsletters of partnered organizations, ACOG, CMA, BRN, with all the different entities of those people that have oversight or have the ability to reach out to our stakeholders and our partners, because it's going to be a process. It's going to take some time. Right now we have the form. It's a 2-page form from what I realized, and the first page has no information and data anyway, so it really is irrelevant.
Yeah,
The second
midwives and the physician's name on it.
On the first page or only on the second page? I thought it was on the second page.
The patient is on the second page, the midwife and the physician and the provider, assuming care, is on the first page. So if I can interrupt for just 1 second.
Sure,
A
please.
point of order, I have a motion on the floor.
Well, we have discussion on the motion is what you've got.
Was there a second?
No, but you
Can you have a discussion without a second?
need a motion, well, okay.
I'll second it.
I
It wasn't particularly clear that you were making a motion.
said I will make a motion to this effect.
Okay, so now you have a second, so now we're having discussion.
Okay, thank you. It's another point of process that is going to evolve, as people are saying. We have a lot of work to do on this whole process, on this form, on the systems that we're talking about. I don't know, I can't define that at this moment. If you have some ideas, Monique, about how that might happen, I'd be really happy to hear that, or from anyone else on the council, or from the audience. But this is us. This is a reporting that is creating some real fear in the state among the midwives. I also know that there have been a couple of glimmers where the hospital staff really feel like it's time that they don't want to take. Is the process then going to include that they do shift the reporting to somebody, as Carrie just mentioned, who has no contact in with the incident itself? We need to get these things clear about how they need to happen before people get named. And that's the doctors also. I would think that this would protect the doctors who are named, if they are named, from a level of liability for perhaps not meeting the transfer in a way that is completely accepting and welcoming to the families involved.
I'm gonna,
Barbara still
Okay,
has
so
the
we have a
microphone.
motion on the floor and we have a second, so I'm still continuing with my
also, I want to say that the hospital reporting form has its own agenda item. And so you can take that out of order, but your report wasn't really an action item when we're moving to an action item that has,
I'll defer. You're absolutely right. I'll defer until such time as it's appropriate. My apologies.
So shall we table my motion until that agenda item?
Yes.
Yes.
I've forgotten what the order is of how to table something.
You just say I table and it's tabled.
I table it.
It's fine, it's tabled.
Did you want to say
I
something
mean,
else?
your other option is you can take the agenda item out of order.
Let's not do that. Let's wait on it. But I want to make sure that Natalie
So
has an opportunity to say something while
Thank
she
you.
still remembers what it was she was going
Thank
to say.
you. So as Carrie was mentioning, it is an agenda item that I will be going into more detail on the form and the outcome of the interested parties meeting. But I do want to clarify that the form that is currently out there was something to get the board into compliance with the law. It wasn't meant to be the perfect form. It was simply to get us into compliance. And now it is a work in progress to get it to where we want it to be. So
I think we all understand that. Yeah.
May
Thank you.
I just comment? Thank you very much for that, because we did in 1993 assume that we would be getting licenses in a timely fashion, and the board was ordered to do a lot of things that it took 3 years to do. And so we're really appreciative of your timely efforts.
you're welcome.
Okay. Is there any public comment on this agenda item being my report to the MAC? All right. Seeing none, I'm going to move forward. So Dr. Byrne is going to now provide us with an update on the new board member packet.
Very good. If you guys look under the materials, item 5. No, item 6.
What about this? We skipped
Yeah, did you
skipped
go
an
over
item.
the other
Oh,
items
I'm
you wanted?
sorry. I did. It's my update on the Midwifery Assistance Task Force. I saw my name twice and thought I'd already done it. So, all right. Dr. Byrne and I worked together on this, and Everybody on the council and in the audience as well should have the proposed language. You should have gotten it as a separate sheet in your packet. It says agenda item 5 at the top of it. It looks like this.
Do you have it?
Um,
Right there.
It's right there. Yeah,
Oh, under
just
seven.
put it right there. Now it's right there.
The language from this was adapted from language for naturopathic assistance, and it also references back to medical assistant language. We felt like we need to have assistance. We need to have that ability to have assistance, and there's nothing in statute currently that allows us to have an assistant who is not either an enrolled student or another licensed midwife. And so we drafted this language so that we could train our own assistants, and also so that schools could create midwife assistant programs if they wanted to do that, and there would be guidelines for it. The hope and the plan is that this language will move forward to the full board in October, and we will get a recommendation from them to move forward and ask the legislature to please codify it in statute. Does anyone from the audience have any questions about this?
And we are saying this has to be in statute. It cannot be in
It
regulation.
has to be in statute because there's no authority in statute for the board to create regulations surrounding it. Yeah. Is there any comments from the council?
Looks very well written and comprehensive. Thank you for your work on that.
Yeah, I
Okay,
agree.
well, I really have to give credit where credit's due. Sarah Davis originally drafted this, and Carrie Webb and I tweaked it a little bit, and Dr. Byrne gave some input, but primarily the original work was done by Sarah Davis. Thank you, Sarah.
Yes.
So, seeing no comment from either the audience or the council, I'd like to know if anyone would like to make a motion that we move this forward to the full board.
So move.
Any further comment from the audience or the council? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions? Any nays? Perfect. So it's moved forward with recommendation to the full board to approve it and send it to the legislature at the beginning of the year so we can move forward on this. Great. All right. Now it's Dr. Byrne's turn.
All right, as a bit of review, we're on agenda item 6, and in the materials you'll see a very nice graph that is titled Comparison of Certified Nurse Midwives and Licensed Midwives. Now, the background for that being discussed today is that approximately a year ago, we felt as a group that there would be value to have some type of overview, summary information available to provide to new board members, but also in a format that it could be useful to help educate both the public and policymakers about maternity care providers. As that was being discussed, it turns out, and with great compliments to the leadership of CNMA and CAM, had already been working to help provide this kind of very easy to read side-by-side documentation. My compliments to Constance and her crew, and Kim Dow and Linda, she's here. So what you see before here, I think, is a really wonderful comparison.
Can you get your microphone closer?
Yes, sir. So what you see is a very, I think, clear, legible, quick to grasp comparison, which would help, again, new board members, but also, if this was on the website, both the public and policymakers. The one additional that I think would be of value is adding a third column and just maternity care providers, which is the physicians, and just having that as also part of the comparison aspect. And then using some of the data from the Medical Board of California to give a sense of the scale. I think that it's really great to be able to show the diversity of where women are going to be able to have access to care for their birth, whether they have a planned home birth, planned hospital birth, or something in between. I think this, again, really helps enhance awareness.
That's great. Is there any comments from the council?
Yes. In preparing this proposed packet, is this the only bit of information that you're imagining having?
Good question. From my awareness, this is just one component of the overall packet. There was actually an interest in writing up a wonderful, more detailed history of midwifery in California. And I think that also would have a wonderful role. But this is one specific nugget and was felt to help both the packets, but also be something I think very valuable for a public interface with public and policymakers via the website.
I would like to suggest that people make sure that they look at the documents and the reams of material, not that we have to use all of it, that has been put together by Faith Gibson, who has been really inscribing our history for a long time.
Yeah, I would second that. What I think we were striving for in this document was something that the majority of physicians might actually read.
As well as new board members. In all
Yeah,
due
new board
fairness,
board
less
members,
is best.
yeah.
In all due fairness to Faith Gibson and all her work and everyone else's work around this subject, the more information you have out there, the less people are going to read, less people are going to understand. The object is that for the people that need to read this and need to make a decision based on where they're going on a go-forward basis as far as creating public policy around the subject, I would recommend that you've got 2 pages here. It sure would be nice to see 1 page, but or 3 pages. You know, I'm just suggesting a 3 page. It's just my understanding of the public and my own ability to comprehend information is less is a whole lot more.
I understand that and understand that succinct really makes a big difference, and there will be some people who might be interested in the more lengthy.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying we should take word for word everything Faith wrote, because I have 3 notebooks and unbelievable numbers of computer files of all the things that Faith has written. But there's a basis there that might be really helpful.
And from the board's perspective, this intention for the chart was to go to our new board members. And the chart is very informative. It provides very good information, and it's very helpful. However, as the intention is for our new board members to become familiar with the roles and responsibilities of a licensed midwife, board staff, we would suggest that maybe a cover sheet is provided to be included with this chart. There is some information. We have information from the RN board. They have a pretty good summary page of what a nurse midwife practice entails that we can provide for reference to whoever's
That'd be
creating
great.
it.
Yeah.
But we do need probably more of a summary, quick, short summary of the responsibilities
To attach to the document that you have in your packet.
Okay.
and provide both of those documents.
In light of the recommendations I'd like to throw out for the group and also for the public comment, so if we're going to have, again, the similar for CNM, so the BRN does have a 1 or 2 page summary.
Currently on their website, while we were doing research on another topic, we came across this document that I can provide to you. It outlines the definition of a certified nurse midwife, goes into the different scope of practice items, and then it gets pretty detailed, and I'm not sure that this item would have to be so detailed,
Okay.
but it's easy to read, it's quick, it's specific to, in this case, a nurse midwife.
Then I would like, that's a great suggestion and the earlier one. So what I'd like to see the representatives from CAM and CNN would grant permission for us to maybe edit down and produce a very concise single page, as recommended, summary overview of maternity care providers, which then could have a second layer of information, a 2 to 3 page view, such as you're recommending. And then for those who are interested, the more richly detailed history information.
Or not even for those that are interested, but just to have it prepared so that if someone were to request it, it would be available.
Excellent.
More so than just that it be done.
I would also like to put in here that I realize that the medical board is a medical board. That is definitely the primary focus of all of the dealings of the medical board. And the medical board regulates other healthcare professions. I believe that any member of the medical board who is new has a due diligence obligation to understand the professions that he or she is regulating. So I totally get that for it to be condensed, for it to be tight, can be extremely valuable. And I do believe that these people need to understand who we are in order to carry out their obligations of regulating midwifery.
All right. Ms. Griffmeyer?
I would completely agree, Karen, with what you're saying. And when we do a board member orientation, as Ms. Yaroslavsky can attest to, it's a one-day training on the individuals. They come up here, they sit for a grueling 6 hours, usually to 7 hours with us, and it's really their first look into what the medical board does. Now, part of the problem with that is that the individuals are coming in with either a couple days under their belt, or a month, depending on when we can get them in here. So they have no idea really when they're coming in, whether they're a physician or a public member. But what we do provide for them is a binder of information that they can take back with them. And so, as Ms. Lowe said, I think it would be great. The one pager, that will give us something that when we talk to them about all of the different allied healths that we also regulate, to show them, here's the easy read one, walk them, because they sometimes don't even know what the scope of practice of a licensed midwife is, or what are their training requirements. Yeah, exactly. So if we can, right, exactly, and we have those for others. So a bulleted for requirements, but then a explanation with this document. And if you'd like to put a document together with the history, all of that then could be placed in, take back with them. We actually mail it to them so they can have it in their offices or in their homes so they can go back and reference it. It would also be helpful if we wanted to do a presentation at in the future at a board meeting. We could use the same document and the materials to walk through, because I think it's good to, as Ms. Yaroslavsky and I've talked about, re-educate members, because they change all the time.
Yes.
And after you've been to a couple board meetings, then you're like, oh, okay, now it's kind of all fitting in. And I do think we definitely need to educate them on all the other different regulatory bodies that we have. So
Yes.
I think that that's very important. And that's kind of the document from our perspective that would be really helpful for us to provide.
And I am sure that orientation meeting is grueling already. It might be that it would be beneficial to the new board members who are coming in to have a presentation at that orientation from each of the professions.
Yeah, we just don't have the time for that.
No, don't even go there. I mean, you're very generous with your expectations of what people are willing to sit for and what they're able to be mentally capable of processing. This is not something you want to go with. Trust me.
I understand.
I know where you're going, but it's not.
I know.
It's not going to happen. It's not.
But we do go over
idea.
each one, Ms. Ehrlich. We do go over each one from the licensing manager goes through, and that's why I'm saying if we had this document from you, it would be a lot
helpful.
easier, absolutely, to give them all the information.
I'm not talking about a
Right.
big presentation.
So what I'm hearing is that what Ms. Gibson actually has to offer to this is larger than what the board needs in the immediacy. And I don't believe, did she work with you on this at all, Dr. Byrne?
Yeah, she's put clearly a lot of time in and shared. She's put a lot, gotcha, guy, a lot of time into this with me.
Okay.
And that's what emerged was that's a great standalone aspect, but we also need something that's going to be a quick snapshot.
Okay. So where I'm going with this is that I would like to create a different task force that would be the two of us that would provide the information that the board is currently asking for, the one-page summary of this data plus the kind of the bullet point bit, and then have you continue to work with Faith on the more expanded data so that there would be two different task forces. Is that possible?
Well, that's getting into a 3-person committee dealing with the same subject. So even if you do a serial meeting with just you and Dr. Byrne and then Dr. Byrne and Miss Gibson, if it's on the same subject, it would have to be a notice to meeting.
She's not a member. She's not on the council.
That's not.
So that's not what I'm envisioning. What I'm envisioning is there being two separate things. One is is this data that is brief, concise, and to the point, and for Faith Gibson and Dr. Byrne to work on more of the historical aspect of midwifery, so that we'd have this is what's current, this is what licensed midwives can do, and we'd have this is how midwives came to be licensed in this state.
I think if your point is to put something together for new board members and anyone kind of looking at trying to get information on licensed midwives, if you want to take it over from this point forward to get it drilled down and complete with what will be most effective, then you can
I can dissolve
change
the
them
previous
right.
task force. Okay.
And
When we could revisit it at another time. After we've concluded whatever work we're doing. Then there could be,
right. I mean,
a
because
year from now, there could be this other task force that works on the more historical data that I wouldn't be a party to.
right.
That would be okay.
That's council's in agreement, so
Okay.
that's what I would recommend.
Okay, so that's what we're doing. So the previous task force is now dissolved, that consisted of Faith Gibson and Dr. Byrne. And Dr. Byrne and myself are forming a new task force to incorporate the recommendations made by staff and the Midwifery Advisory Council members, so that we have something by December that we can take to the board to be incorporated in medical board packets. So any further comment from the audience or from council members?
So let me just be clear. What we're looking at currently under item number 6, it's been done and looks very nice and is very understandable, is something that you're not going to go forward with. You're going to do more, Dr. Byrne?
This was produced by two very
Right.
valuable key stakeholder groups. And so this is where I do want to at least allow opportunity for public comment. I'd like to see if they allow us to use this as a template
Yeah.
to then refine it,
Right.
make it a little more concise for the recommended use.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted clarification. Thank you.
Are both the stakeholders in the room? I see Cam, but is CNMA, is there someone here from CNMA today? I don't see CNMA. I can gather that information via the internet. So,
I also have a question for Natalie. Is it the document that you said came off of the CNM or ACNM or CNMA website, whichever it is, BRN website? Could we get a copy of that, each of us?
I'll provide you a copy, and it is a public document on their website. So
Or a
reference.
link?
Just a link.
A link would be just fine.
I will email you all the link.
All right.
okay. So since there's no further public comment on this agenda item, we're going to move forward. Agenda item 7 is update on implementation of Assembly Bill 1308. Ms. Lowe, will you please update us?
Thank you. At the last MAC meeting in March of this year, several items were discussed regarding implementation of Assembly Bill 1308, including the need for several interested parties meetings, the completion of the practice guidelines for California licensed midwives, necessary outreach regarding the challenge mechanism process, the hospital reporting form, and the pathway for certified nurse midwives to become licensed midwives. As always, our board staff have been very busy trying to accommodate all of the new requirements to ensure that the new changes in law are being met. The practice guidelines for licensed midwives was presented to the full board and was approved for dissemination at the May 1st and 2nd quarterly board meeting. The guidelines have now been published and are available on the board's website. Board staff have sent requests for information from the approved schools offering the challenge mechanism, requesting documentation to ensure their programs will be able to meet the new requirements in law. We have received some information back from the schools. However, we have not had the opportunity to review that to determine if they are in fact meeting the requirements. Board staff and legal counsel will be meeting soon to discuss it, and we'll be able to provide an update at the next MAC meeting regarding our findings. The board did hold an interested parties meeting on August 7th to discuss the transfer of planned out-of-hospital delivery to hospital reporting form, as well as the pathway for certified nurse midwives to become licensed midwives. As an update will be provided on those issues during the next agenda item, I won't go into too many details except to say the meeting was pretty successful. We had quite a few attendees and a lot of suggestions were provided, so I will go into more detail next. Board staff will be scheduling another interested parties meeting, which will be held in the next month or two, to discuss the potential regulations that will be needed to define Business and Professions Code Section 2507B1AI to define pre-existing maternal disease or condition likely to affect the pregnancy. The meeting may also include additional discussions on the reporting form if it's found to be necessary. The meeting will be scheduled soon and information will be posted on the board's website. And I would like to mention and bring up the fact that there was some confusion on the interested parties meeting date, and that at the last MAC meeting, we did not indicate what specific date that meeting would be held. As with all open meetings, the board's required to post the agenda 10 days prior, and that was done. We've also sent out the email to all of the interested parties that are on the NBC subscribers list. If you did not get that email with the agenda, that means that you have not signed up for the subscribers list. And I would recommend that anyone in the community that is interested in obtaining that information go onto the board's website and sign up. So we will be hopefully scheduling the meeting soon and getting it out as soon as possible. The board wanted to hold the meeting sooner than it was. However, due to resources within the board, or crunch time for physician and surgeon licensing in the end of the fiscal year, that was the only date that we could get it in prior to the MAC meeting to provide some feedback. So hopefully we'll have a little more time to notify interested parties so that they can ensure that they're at the meeting. That concludes my update at this time for AB 1308. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Any questions from council members? Any questions from the public? Seeing none, we'll move to the next agenda item. Oh, sorry. Ms. Davis?
Come on up and use
Yeah,
the
come on
microphone,
up.
please.
Sarah Davis and Rosanna Davis. So Ms. Davis has been collecting reports from licensed midwives in the state about difficulties that they've been having in accessing care for their clients after January 1st of this year. So for items related to obtaining laboratory tests or drugs and devices, as well as
ultrasound referrals from licensed midwives. Yeah. So most of these things have gotten resolved with a lot of communication back and forth, just clearing things up with vendors about the new regulation and legislation. The ultrasound issue, though, continues to be a problem in a couple of isolated places in the state. And I don't know what's to be done about that. There was one of those reports forwarded to the medical board, and I was wondering if we could get some follow-up on that.
We did receive the report of your findings. I'm not sure if it was a survey or direct contact with your population, but we reviewed the information that was provided, and I want to say there was maybe 6 different reports at that time. It was pretty early on when you provided us the data. So based on that population and the amount of responses that we had received from you at that time, we haven't taken any further action on it. I do want to mention that we will be going forward with another survey to the licensed midwife community prior to the December MAC meeting. And we had obtained the survey results a couple months after the laws were implemented, and it was set to resurvey them in December. And at that time, once we get the feedback from the majority of the population, then we will definitely be seeing what outreach is necessary.
So on the form that you send out for the survey, are you actually requesting information as to names of places so that somehow there's a communication breakdown is what I'm hearing, and if there's a communication breakdown, to know that there's a communication breakdown is great, but on the other hand, it doesn't solve any problems, then it might be best informative, and I don't know if that's why I'm asking the question, if in fact the licensed midwives were allowed to or were requested to list specifically
Who they're having
who
trouble
they're
with.
having trouble with, which entities they are specifically, their address and phone numbers, so that in fact maybe they just need to be educated and they haven't read their mail for the last 3 years. But be it that we could then take the opportunity then to
Reach out.
again do outreach and education, because it's after a while you have to say, I'm sorry, you need to know about this information.
So the original survey that we did send out was created by NBC staff, and we have the ability to ask or edit any of the fields. The original one that went out only had specific questions on the different items that we were concerned with obtaining feedback on, and then it allowed for comments to be made for each question. There's also a comment field at the end of the survey. The results, though, there was no specifics on who was denying the request, but that is something that we can include on the survey.
So let's do it.
I wonder if staff could create some sort of open letter like happened with the labs a couple years ago that was actually really successful, which just like explicitly stated in narrative form, licensed midwives may order ultrasounds. Because even though licensed midwives have been providing copies of the new law, it hasn't necessarily been successful, but more of a letter form from the board might be more successful.
And I would like to add that the letter that was sent out about labs, some of the midwives in the state who tried to use that to be able to order labs were told by the lab providers that they would not honor that letter unless it was signed by a medical board staff member with a phone number.
Okay,
So if that could be included, it would be helpful.
So someone has given these entities a business license to operate. Someone in the state of California, they're paying a fee to someone in the state of California for the opportunity of having a fictitious name license or a business license or some kind of licensing. So there is some way of controlling information that is going to them. So maybe we need to know from the medical board perspective and from therefore the MAC perspective, who these entities are, and ask for that supervising entity to inform their constituents. This is like a no-brainer. So I mean, it's like he said, she said. I'm getting tired of he said, she said. Let's stop with the he said, she said, and figure out who's going to tell what. Okay, so I would ask that the survey that goes out has enough information that you can garner this information, and then we need to turn around and say to the maybe now before the survey goes out. In fact, wherever you, Dr. Byrne and I, you take the minutes.
This is exactly what I've asked. This is exactly what I've asked our membership to do, is to give very specific information about who to contact and what the problem is, so that the medical board can follow up.
Dr. Byrne?
I greatly appreciate the insights you guys are sharing. Could you teach me a little bit, when you said obtain ultrasound, and this might sound ludicrous, was it to actually purchase an ultrasound machine from a vendor, or simply getting an ultrasound performed by one of your clients?
A referral for a 20-week anatomy scan denied. Yeah.
So I think an open letter has a lot of value as well, because most of the providers of ultrasound services, clearly are going to be either hospitals or physician groups or even smaller practices. So I think the combination of a distribution of information to all the providers using the information provided, but also to have something in hand, because I think in any given community there might be 4 or 5 different ultrasound providers if you're not in a rural area. So any other feedback for us of ways of us supporting you?
Talk to your colleagues.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not my colleagues. It's a large and diverse healthcare system, and so how, in addition to ultrasounds, have other things emerged from pharmacies, drug devices? Just teach us.
Pharmaceutical suppliers and medical suppliers.
Many of which are probably out of state, correct? if
Bo-
they're
both
national
in-state-
vendors. So
in-state
again,
and out-of-state, yeah.
a combination of a California-based approach,
Mm-hmm.
but also some type of document you could have in hand might assist you.
Yes, definitely a document would be at least a first step.
So I'd like to add something to your list, which I know is a problem throughout the state, and we have talked about it quite a bit, and that is post-dates testing. For someone who's perfectly normal, who's past her due date, obtaining a non-stress test is very difficult in many regions, primarily because those are usually done at hospitals, and unless you have admitting privileges, you cannot order one. And I'm wondering if maybe we could have a task force to troubleshoot that and see if there's some end around that we could come to so that nobody has to resort to having their client go into the OB unit and say, I have decreased fetal movement, so that she can get required testing that most licensed midwives don't have the ability to perform themselves and cannot order. And Dr. Byrne, I'm interested in whether you have any thoughts on that.
I do. So these are actually really fascinating implementation things that are coming up. And it could be that there's gaps in providers of those services, but also could be new opportunities to increase awareness. Again, I'm not sure about the rural communities, but in most communities, there are a number of providers of NST services. So it might be the hospital, but it might be a local MFM clinic. It might be a local clinic that provides diabetes and pregnancy services. So it might be that there are existing resources in the community that simply have not been identified and tapped into. So I think this is pretty exciting.
Even in Sacramento hospital, as far as I know, the hospital is the only place to get an NST. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Gregg. But
Doctor's office.
Yeah.
physician's offices. But then
so
the person would have to be their client.
No, not necessarily. So here's a wonderful opportunity to build engagement. If this part of this whole shift was to increase communication awareness in real time, here's a chance to try and ferret out, well, who is it in my community who does NSTs, and might they allow me to refer my patients to them? And in doing so, you're building networks. Exactly.
So I would like to say that the medical board would be willing to, staff would be willing to draft that letter and have it sent out by our lovely director. And we can also post that information on our website. We do currently have, I want to say it's a student assistant letter that went out to everyone that's out there, so we can do the same thing.
I also wonder if it would be helpful to have an article in the newsletter, perhaps under Dr. Jim Burns.
For medical board?
Yeah, and the medical board newsletter to this effect.
We'd
Okay.
be willing to put that
So it can
article
go
in the
on
newsletter. And then also with that letter that we'd be drafting, we can send it out to some of the specific regulatory agencies that would be affected, specifically CDPH, who could get the information out to their labs and so forth.
May I
Okay.
make a comment before we go forward?
Please,
I
Dr.
think one thing in the law that we tried to avoid by putting some legal protections in for physicians that we weren't able to keep in there is bringing up the majority of this problem. Physicians are not mandated to accept consults, and they're very fearful because of the vicarious liability. Now, we tried to put a clause in there. We tried to put 3 clauses in there. All 3 of them were taken out by parties who objected to that. We are working on our side on ACOG to try to give the physicians a standardized legal language that they can put in their chart after they've consulted on a patient that then sort of makes it the end and doesn't continue on the relationship.
Good.
But I don't think the board can put out and mandate that physicians consult on these patients,
No, it can't.
nor, because the law doesn't say that.
No, I don't.
Right,
I don't
so
think we're recommending that.
Right. So I think, going to try to solve that legal problem is one thing that will solve a lot of these problems that you run into.
One other layer of this is, so I mostly provide care to women who can pay out of pocket for an ultrasound, and we have a private service nearby. But what I'm hearing from midwives who provide care to women who would otherwise choose Medi-Cal is that they can't get in to get an ultrasound because they're not getting referral from a Medi-Cal provider, and they can't afford to pay out of pocket.
I think I could
Dr.
help
Byrne?
comment on that. So as a Medi-Cal provider, there's no prohibition of me seeing a patient, regardless of who's referring them to me. So there's opportunities for, I think, again, increased awareness with that.
Thank you.
And again, we're maybe missing out that many of these clients are now eligible under Covered California, and they actually might be eligible for Medi-Cal and probably should have that in place and enrolled, even if they're using a planned home birth licensed midwife, because should any catastrophic event occur, they'd like to have all their coverage and everything in place. So early in the pregnancy, it might be good to help patients encouraged to be enrolled for either Covered California or Medi-Cal. That would facilitate the more simple things like this too.
Okay.
Just to keep going with this conversation, Dr. Byrne, at the same time as this bill has given us an opportunity to outreach with physicians who may be unfamiliar with licensed midwives or how the collaboration can work, others who previously were willing to accept referrals are now not willing to do so. There's a large perinatology group in my part of the state that previously accepted referrals and doesn't now. So, not all avenues. That, for example, would be a great place to send somebody post dates for their antepartum testing, but that particular group isn't willing to do that. So, this obviously is going to be an ongoing issue because, like Dr. Gregg said, we can't fix the physician part here. Private entities and businesses like a radiology lab that's private, that's not run by physicians, or a medical supplier, I think the letter will work very well. But with a physician group, it's going to be probably a longer term situation.
So again, these are great organic questions where we start realizing there might be opportunities, even what's seen as an obstacle. If the group was willing to see these clients before, what changed? Well, there's now not a supervisory doctor, quote unquote, on the referral. However, as Dr. Gregg brought up, if they over time receive reassurance from ACOG that this is not putting them at any kind of vicarious liability to perform that service, the door not only reopens for your community, but then that could propagate to other providers in your community who in the past would not have served your patients and in other communities. We're currently, I think, about 26 weeks into this, right? Yeah. And a lot of these other issues are more than 26 years old. So the pace that we're approaching this is actually very encouraging. So rather than a discouraging thing, this is actually really great and an opportunity.
So might I suggest that we can't fix everything for everybody. That's not our job, that's not our responsibility, and we don't have the time or the resources. But this is an opportunity, as you're hearing from Dr. Byrne and from Dr. Gregg, and you've heard from all of the members here, is that within your communities, you need to make sure your communities are educated, and your communities have no reason why not to pick up that phone or go knocking on the door or send a letter and try and evolve and develop relationships together, be it with ACOG specifically or with people out in the community. But it seems to me that this is not a one-way street. This is where we're looking for collaborative partners here to make it work. And it's going to take some time, and we just have to suck it up and be patient. In my opinion, of course.
Thank you. Are there any further comments?
I just wanted to comment for you guys that sometimes in some communities, in the past we've seen this, there are traveling ultrasound ladies, or usually they're ladies, who will go around, and it may be more in your rural areas, but somebody who has a business of just taking care of this. You might look for somebody, like Dr. Burns said, who might take care of diabetic women, or someone who has their own business outside of a doctor's office.
But again, many doctors' offices probably would be as well. So you can see the complexity. If there are women receiving care who have not enrolled in any type of coverage because it doesn't appear to be on the radar with your current relationship with them, encouraging them to get into care actually could open a lot of these doors. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden that provider office sees you as a partner, and they see you as an opportunity to help serve you better so they could get referrals from you in the future. So it becomes, I think, a stronger network of care delivery.
Yeah, I think that what we're really hearing here is that it's going to take some time. It's not an immediate fix. And we have to beat the pavement personally as care providers and advocates for these women to get them the care that they need. And we should be not discouraged when the first 5 people that we approach say no, because it might be that 6th person that says, sure, we'd love to help you. And it's going to take time, and it's going to take working together. And you know, if somebody in one part of the state comes up with something that works for educating doctors in their area, share it. You know, CAM is a wonderful way to do that. So be sure that if you're educating physicians or labs or pharmaceutical companies in your area and meeting with success, share that with CAM so that it can be replicated in other areas of the state. Any other comments? Great. Seeing none, we're going to move on to the update on the licensed midwives interested parties meeting. Ms. Lowe will now provide an update.
Thank you. So as mentioned, we did hold an interested parties meeting last week on Thursday, August 7th, to discuss the transfer reporting form and the pathway for certified nurse midwives to become licensed midwives. There was a good turnout for the meeting, and several suggestions and requests were made. Some individuals and agencies at the meeting indicated that they would be providing additional comments at a later date, and those will be getting sent directly to board staff, so we are anticipating some additional comments. All comments that were made during the meeting and those that will be provided directly to staff will be reviewed and used to begin the process of drafting regulations to clearly identify the items that will be included on the reporting form. As I mentioned before, if we find that additional feedback is necessary for the form, we can add it to our next interested parties meeting to discuss further. Concerns were identified during the meeting that board staff will begin to implement as soon as possible, including the need for additional outreach regarding the form. We've begun to draft language to include on the board's website to provide additional information on the purpose of the form, the requirements, and some additional instructions for completing the form. That would be available on the Midwifery page as well as a link on our homepage. Currently, the link on the homepage takes you directly to the form. We're envisioning that that link would now take you to the informational page with a link to the form. Also, some of the additional changes that we will be making as soon as possible will include moving the names of the provider assuming care, the licensed midwife, the physician, onto the second page of the form to be included with the patient's name. And again, that's because the second page of the form is not sent to CMQCC. We'll also be trying to clearly identify on the form that it is for licensed midwife transfers so that there's less confusion in the hospital on who the report needs to be completed for. Outreach is going to be a very important thing for the board to do, as well as the midwifery community. Some of the things that the board will be working on will be reaching out to California Department of Public Health, asking them to disseminate the information to the hospitals within California. We'll also be providing a newsletter article in the future, as well as possibly providing the information in the next MAC update at the full board in October, to get that information out to more physicians and surgeons in the area. Again, we don't have a specific information on the other requested changes for the form, except to say that we are taking all of the feedback that was provided and we'll begin reviewing it and then be able to provide you with an update at the next MAC meeting. Are there any questions on that?
The only issue I have is my motion, which I'd now like to take off the table.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that the board is going to move forward with implementing a form that may need a lot of changes through regulation. There's no clear process in place for how to direct the hospital to fill out the form. The statute does not direct any names whatsoever be on the form, first page or second page. And I remain with my concern. As long as there are names on it, the board will be compelled to open investigations with possibly erroneous information that then is going to have to be refuted and proven to investigative staff at the board by providers. So we're going to spend staff time and dollars. We're going to spend provider time, which is money, to correct something that we could circumvent at the outset while we're putting correct procedures in place by just striking all the names, having no place on the form to put anybody's name. And I think as we move forward with this process, more and more questions come to me about what we might actually want on the form. And I know that a lot of people have given a lot of input already on this, and I've been one of them. But one of my questions currently, just to give you an idea, is statute does not say that we're only going to look at licensed midwife transfers. It says all transfers from home to hospital. And perhaps we need to decide, one of the issues historically with this is that physicians have received transfers from home to hospital, and sometimes they're train wrecks. And it's upsetting to the receiving provider. It's upsetting to those of us in the community. But there's no tracing for, was that a licensed midwife? Was it an unlicensed midwife? Was it a CNM? Was it even perhaps a physician? Because some physicians in some communities do home birth. And maybe the data we want to get is who actually transferred this patient. Was it a licensed person or wasn't it? So that's just one of several questions that are beginning to come up for me, which is why I've made the recommendation that we take the names off the form while we're developing the process and making sure that we do have the data elements on this form that we really want to collect before we end up with a whole bunch of forms that may or may not be useful because they haven't even been filled out correctly.
Can I add to that list you made?
Please.
Also, people who are having their births unattended, which seems to be something that rises when you have midwives who are constrained from doing births the way they used to.
Yeah.
So let me ask the question. The form, a couple of questions. The form on a go-forward basis, I hope, would not be set in stone prior to at least our chairs visually having a discussion. I would assume that's going to happen anyway. But what is it that we are trying to achieve by having this form in the first place? We're trying to achieve certain data that we need to have. We're trying to alleviate the barriers to a smooth transfer of care when necessary.
Correct.
We're trying to do specific things. The issue of whether, my understanding after probably being the longest serving board member on the medical board, is that the medical board does not go looking for investigations to perform. They perform investigations based on a complaint. A form, in my opinion, in all due honesty, does not rise to the level of a complaint. A complaint is a complaint and a form is a form. So I think that in all due, I understand your concerns because there's a history of concern here. So I'm just, if we could be more clear on what we need to achieve by having the form, and maybe I don't understand what we're really trying to achieve, number one, and number two, some kind of clarity from the staff that investigations are, data is data. We need data. We need to know, is it specifically in the community of XYZ that there's major problems because XYZ community refuses to let the door of the hospital be open because there's a woman there that needs to be helped or not? We need to have data for all sorts of reasons. And what data we collect, it's better to get it at the beginning than at the end and think, oh, we forgot to get that. So maybe we need to step back 2 minutes, understanding there's been a whole lot of problems in the past. Not, trust me, all of you, I know there's been problems in the past. But on a go-forward basis, what is the form going to remedy? what is it we're trying to achieve? Maybe I need a better understanding of that.
I just want to comment on what you said, Barbara. At the interested parties meeting and at other meetings, I believe in the March MAC meeting,
I mean, I've been there too, so I mean,
yeah.
I forgot.
Legal staff has made it quite clear that these forms could generate an investigation. Just
Okay,
by
I didn't
virtue
know.
of the
Okay,
fact
I'm
that
just
they're a form.
okay.
So that's where the concern is coming from on that issue. The purpose of the form legislatively was to gather data so that we could smooth home to hospital transports. So
Okay.
that there became enough data that we could see, well, okay, there's a glitch over here. Let's see if we can solve that so that women and babies are actually getting the care they need in a timely fashion. And
See, that's what I
Honestly,
assumed. That's what I assumed it
yeah,
was for.
having the names at this juncture is not going to add to that.
So by not, okay, I can see having the names might not add to that. On the other hand, if we're going to try and fix the problem of the smooth transfer,
Yes.
but not the person
Not
that's...
the physician, not the midwife, not the patient at this juncture.
So that all physicians that perform services at that hospital will have to be educated versus the specific physician. And all licensed midwives will have to be educated versus the narrow focused ones. So I'm saying is that by having no data, are we constraining ourselves to the ability to do what is intended?
I think that it's not a big assumption that if one physician at a particular hospital is inappropriately receiving transfers or one midwife is inappropriately transferring, that there are others.
Okay.
I think it's a pretty
That's a valid point.
reasonable leap of faith to say that, if there's a problem at this particular hospital, which we can see from the reporting forms, that everybody at that hospital and who interfaces with that hospital gets educated about, how this is supposed to happen. And it will ultimately, that step itself will save board time in not educating the entire state, which doesn't really have the resources to do, but targeting specific places that are having problems while we're creating a form that really collects the data that we want. There were 3 pages of things that people have asked to have on the form at the interested parties meeting that aren't on the form yet that still needs to be hashed out.
Can I ask a question of counsel?
Please.
Could you help clarify one of the questions that came up? One, what is stated as a required elements of the form? Is name or it's not so much name, it's personal identifier, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a name, a license number might suffice. Is that stated or not? And then second, if it is stated, does this group have an ability to simply advise to discontinue that, or do we have the ability to halt collecting the data?
I review Business and Professions Code Section 2510 as a whole, and so with Ms. Barravon's concern that it's relating to all transfers, well, it's talking about licensed midwives, and it's in the licensed midwifery code section, so it's referring to transfers by licensed midwives. It also says that if a client is transferred to a hospital, the licensed midwife shall provide records and speak with the receiving physician. And so in this section, that's one paragraph, it's talking about the requirements and the form. And so that is where that's the basis for including the parties involved to get the documentation about whether this has occurred or not.
Okay. Then I would like to add to that, then when we look at other existing forms in place to help monitor and track basically California citizen safety in the medical setting, such as ambulatory care centers, patients who end up needing hospital referral, it's actually standard to include the identifier of the providers, both on the outpatient side and the inpatient side, and some type of patient identifier. And again, I'm sensitive and respectful of the concern of past cultures. We're in a very data-driven culture now. And if we're collecting data, having the individual identifier is so crucial, because here's one thing. If everyone's doing a great job, then the more forms showing everyone's doing a great job, it quiets those voices concerned about the outliers, because the outlier reports are still going to come in. So I would highly encourage including as much data as you can for every transfer, and including with pride the licensed individual's number, because then it's going to be a little easier to say the outliers are outliers and we'll address them as outliers.
Why wouldn't we have a cover sheet on this to explain the instructions that the hospital has to fill it out, the hospital has to give a copy to the to whomever requested, the licensed midwife, the patient, the hospital needs to keep a record. I mean, maybe if we had more of a little bit of a dialogue here on or a cover sheet.
These are all things I'm hoping get addressed in regulation. This is kind of my main point here, is that we don't have good processes in place.
So you're saying because we don't have good processes in place, we shouldn't have the form, period?
But the statute does require that the form exist and be used. So we had to have a form to be in compliance with the statute, and that's what's been done. It is in the process of being refined.
And my motion is that the council recommend that names be removed from the form until such time as we have a clear process that has been well defined.
So that's your motion now.
That is my motion.
Second on the motion.
I think
I want Ms. Webb to say again whether we have the ability to do that before we go any farther. Does the board have the ability to not put names on this form at this moment in time? Or is your interpretation of the law that it is dictated that at least the name of the licensed midwife be on the form?
My interpretation is that it's included, that the names are included.
Okay. Is it a name or a unique identifier number? Could it be a
I don't think that matters to the midwives, and you know, there are occasions where transfer is appropriate. The fact that there is a transfer form is evidence that you're transferring when a transfer should occur.
I'm not opposed to ultimately having names on it. I want to make that clear. What I'm having an issue with at this juncture is that, let me back up a second. When we created the Licensed Midwife Annual Report, we did it without input from statisticians in general. And we now have a form that is very difficult to interpret, and numbers don't add up, and it's totally subject to error. And what I'd like to not see happen is the same thing with this hospital reporting form. I would like to not end up here a year from now, after we've gone through a regulatory process, if we continue to use this form and figure out, gosh, you know, look at how many investigations that weren't necessary got generated from this, when we could circumvent it by deleting the names from the form in the interim while we're crafting regulations that really do dictate how the hospitals are to report it. What are the instructions for filling out the form? How does the hospital know that the midwife is licensed? Does the midwife have to show her license? What are all these points that could save us a lot of grief in this next year,
so when you,
while we're at the table for crafting regulations?
What's your timeline on crafting regulations for this?
I'm not sure what staff has for that.
Well, we've only had the one interested parties meeting. There's obviously very differing opinions on what regulations should be in place. We haven't had the opportunity to review all of the information that's being provided. So the next board meeting is in October. It would not make it for the October meeting. So possibly could be prepared to present at the February meeting. I would like to clarify from the board standpoint is that this form does have multiple intentions, not only data statistical purposes, also to verify the data it was mentioned with the LMAR so that there is some comparison
Right.
to ensure that the LMAR is being completed correctly. But also in my opinion, or in the board's perspective, the statute requires the licensed midwife provide the records. It requires them to transfer the patient at certain timeframes based on the guidelines. In order for the board to enforce that, we need to know who is providing the transfer, who the physician is to obtain additional information. Also, it is not the board's intention to open an investigation or a complaint on every form that is received.
I understand.
However, it is the board's mission to provide consumer protection in California. And if the information provided on that form warrants further review by our complaint unit or investigative staff, the board would be responsible
Absolutely.
to take further action, whether it's opening a complaint or an investigation. It's not the intent of the board to fully investigate every single midwife that transfers a patient to a hospital.
I understand that.
Hope that's clear.
I also want to make it clear that I'm not bringing this issue because I'm worried that midwives are going to get investigated in an appropriate way. I'm bringing the issue because I can foresee that there will be an increase in the number of investigations of midwives, and if a midwife is investigated for a transfer, the doctor is also going to have to take time to provide information. And based on the reports of licensed midwives of what they're being told at hospitals, what information is being gathered at hospitals, I think we can foresee that there is going to be data that is completely inaccurate that's going to generate investigations because the board has to investigate.
Can I ask counsel to help give us some education regarding the distinction between a complaint process and an investigation process? Background beyond that, I as a doc, I had a patient complain against me. How inconsiderate. She filed a complaint with the Medical Board of California because she received a bill for her services from Florida. Yeah, I rendered services for an ultrasound. She got a bill from Florida. She thought that was fraud. I was working for a large national medical group centered out of Florida. I got a letter from the medical board saying we received this complaint. I did a 3-sentence response. Case closed. As a provider, I had an emotional response. I did not like the idea that someone complained. I did not want to be at risk of complaint, but I realized that the process of protecting patients' safety, it made it reasonable to do that. So do you mind, again, I hear a concern that we don't want to create a very dangerous culture where there's investigations, but could you teach us about the distinctions between a complaint process, if one arises, and an investigation process? And maybe this will allay some of the concerns.
Yeah. However, one of the things that I see, our law compels us to do certain things, but it does not compel the provider who is at the hospital to comply. And so they could write on the form that we didn't provide the records, that they never saw us, that we didn't accompany the patient and make report. We have no way of, would the medical board, if they got a report from the hospital that said we didn't do that and we didn't do that and we didn't do that, could we send them a 3-sentence letter and say, yes, we did, yes, we did, yes, we did?
Well, you might, and that's why I do have a question actually to counsel. Do you mind helping give us some insight? Because we're idiots and we know that.
Oh.
No, seriously, I'm very ignorant. If you could teach about the distinction.
The board gets so many complaints and very similar to what you've described, and board staff reaches out to the provider, gets more information. Sometimes it's closed at that point, and that's the end of it. If it is a quality of care issue that requires further review, it would go to a midwifery consultant before it goes to investigative staff. And the midwifery consultant would be looking at whether there is a departure from the standard of care. And beyond that, there would have to be clear and convincing evidence before an accusation is ever filed. And there's a lot of stops along the way where cases are weeded out. And clear and convincing evidence is a very high burden. It's more than the preponderance of the evidence. It's slightly less than beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a high burden. And you're professionals, and you're not going to get away from these people looking at your work.
That's not the purpose of my comment, to get away from people looking at our work.
That's being evaluated by the board.
That's not the purpose at this point. I think that we have jumped into creating a form because a form had to be out there without going through a regulatory process that would allow for all of these comments and allow us to create a form and instructions for filling it out that would protect patients. I mean, because we're talking about putting patient names on this form, which means if there's an investigation, it's possible that a patient may be the one that's called. We're talking about putting providers' names on this, and there's no clear process or procedure in place for filling the thing out.
Your microphone on?
It says green.
Yeah, okay.
Is there a way to somehow just say that this form is only to be used for information and data collection purposes for the next year or until you go to the board? There's no way to insist that. There can't be a disclaimer on the form that says this is for information purposes. If you have a complaint, you have to go through a different process.
It's like any other document that's received by the board. The board is obligated to follow procedures for complaints, and it doesn't have to be identified as a complaint if board staff looks at it and there's reason for it to be looked into further. It has to go through the process for public protection.
And given that the board must have a procedure, I believe it is incumbent on us to have a procedure for this form before it names
really,
names.
The questions on the form, I'm having difficulty understanding why there needs to be a long explanation for how to complete the form.
Because it's in question. Because there are questions about it.
So here's a for instance for you, just to kind of highlight that. I've worked in hospitals. I know that they are often understaffed, that sometimes the person with the least amount of knowledge is the one who has to fill out the paperwork.
Yeah.
It is entirely possible that someone could be transported appropriately to the hospital on August 1st, that nobody copied the records and put them in the patient's chart. And now we're at September 1st, and somebody who had nothing to do with the transfer whatsoever is filling out the form. And the only way that that person will know were records submitted or not is whether or not they're part of the chart. And if they were never copied, then the box is going to be checked no, when in fact the midwife may have provided records. That's just
You're talking about something that's not going to be cured by an instruction sheet.
That's true, but let me suggest this. I mean, we're going to beat this horse to death soon, okay? On this form, as it is now, there are people that have concerns. There are things that are missing that I can see on the form. There's no signature of the person that's taken the data. There's no signature. There's no verification signature at all, which is fine at the moment. But if this is the form that we need to use for now until we figure out something, this isn't going to be set in stone, this form. It can be changed. That maybe that there needs to be the understanding by the staff of the medical board and by the midwifery community that as on a go-forward basis, that this is a form that's going to take a look at for 6 months until the regulations get through, until the other processes get through. And for 6 months, there's going to be a hold on anything other than collection of the data for the sake of data collection. And to see from the staff's perspective, is it meeting the needs? And from the MAC perspective, and from your professional organization's perspective, is it meeting the needs that was so desired? And then tweaking it as it goes. I take a look at, I've been known to design forms in my history. So I'm looking at this form and I right away see that someone has filled it out, but I don't have a clue as to who the person is that has filled out this form. I don't see the date that it was filled out. There are things that are missing that if you were looking to collect data and collect information and make it real, there's missing stuff on here. But for now, it looks pretty official. It really does look pretty official. And if it means that the hospital has to put their name on it, if the doctor has to put their name on it, if the licensed midwife has to put her name on it, for the purpose of seeing, are babies being transferred, first of all? Is there a seamless transition? Is it on a go-forward basis, working to meet the needs of whatever needs are needing to be met? As it's a work in progress. We've had this problem. I just don't know where to go. I mean, we've got, I think we just need to figure out something beside we're taking every name off, and beside we're going to wait until every interested party is met, and until we have the regulations. We have to have some kind of middle ground here. So from a legal perspective, I've heard we have to have the form. From the consternation of the people that have been speaking, there are barriers to having the accuracy verified. So what I'm asking, is it possible for this form to go forward as it is today, for staff and the executive director sitting here to say that this is a form that we're going to use for the purpose of data collection for the next 6 months, as well as any data that needs to be tweaked on this form as the process goes through with interested parties and regulations. And at the end of the regulatory process, there will be a new form designed that everyone's going to agree on in advance. Wrong, but anyway. And the way that we can put a timeline and a begin date and an end date that come by next April, that it's going to be over with. Can we go there?
So I just want to say something real quickly.
Please.
So from a legal perspective, I just want to bring us back to the reason we have this form right now. In the condition that it's in, the statute, the changes to the statute went into effect. The board is required to have this form in place.
Yeah, we get that.
And what we have in the form right now is basically what we are allowed to do right now without regulation, right? And that's what we have. The idea is not to avoid the regulatory process.
No, I know that.
Right. So what we have right now is our interpretation of the statute, the bare minimum that we can use right now to go forward and to implement the statute until we get to the point where we can actually have the regulatory hearings and get input from all the interested parties.
Ms. Gerkmeyer?
So first of all, I apologize. So if I say something crazy that you've already discussed, I was out of the meeting for a little bit. I got it called out. So I'm apologizing, but I've kind of got the gist from people talking to me when I walked back in. So a couple things on this form, and speaking to Ms. Yarosovsky's comment, I think as a regulatory body, a form coming into the board that causes us concern, we would be remiss in our consumer protection mandate in not doing anything with that form if we had a grave concern about the form coming in. Now, I can tell you in the form in its current form, that it doesn't lend us a lot of information on what happened. So it is very difficult, even at this time, were something to come in for us to do a lot. But I want to talk to you about what the process is.
In perspective, could you also tell everyone, out of the total number of complaints that come into the board on an annual basis, what the number of actual investigations are?
Absolutely. So
out of the total number of doctors,
I'm going to talk about physicians and surgeons, and I can give you midwives because it's in your packet. So for physicians and surgeons, we get about 7,500 to 8,000 complaints. 1,500 of them get actually investigated at the field level, and about 400, it was 394 last time, actions actually get taken. So what the process is that everybody needs to know is for us to do our job when we get a form in, even with the patient's name on it, we cannot get records without going back to the patient and asking them to sign a release to get those medical records. So we would actually have to go back to the patient, get that information, unless we could subpoena them. And I don't think with the limited information that we have, we would have to really investigate and get more information from the hospital in order to be able to support a subpoena based on this form alone. Then in addition, someone pulled me on and said, you have to say this on your way up there. And so the other thing that's really important is we treat midwives the same as a physician when we're doing an investigation process, which means we would go to that midwife and ask them not only for their records, but we're going to get your side of the story. We have to send a letter to physicians, but we use that in the same process for our midwives. We would want you to say what happened in the care and treatment of this patient. So we're going to come to you and ask you for that information. Based on the forms that we have right now, I don't know that they will lend themselves to even opening a complaint or an investigation based again on that limited information. But we're one to come in right now, and I would hate to put a moratorium on it, one to come in that looked very, very negligent. We would want to go and get as much information as we can. And please remember, our investigations are objective. Our investigators are told they have to be the one who gathers the information that is then received and reviewed by an attorney general to determine if there is a violation of the law. In care and treatment cases, it's going to go to a licensed midwife to review the care and treatment that was provided to that patient, to our list of medical experts on that. Licensed midwife experts. So I want to let everybody know we're not just going to take that and run blindly with that form. We take it very seriously when we have the forms come in, be it a form for a midwife or for a individual physician or RDO, any of our complaints. So I want to let you know there are steps that will be followed that will not lend itself to anything else. So, and I think it's important that we have the licensed midwife information. I think it's important that we have the patient information, and it's important that we have the doctor's information that was there to talk to if we were to go down that path. And also, I think the law allows us to, and I think Ms. Webb's probably already talked about it.
Could I just ask you to repeat? There's 7,500 to 8,000 complaints, 1,500 investigations, and how many actions? Or
400.
400.
400. And if you look at even at your midwifery statistics, so in 13-14 we received 26 complaints. Only one of those was referred in that year. I can't say that those 26 what has the outcome akin, because this is in that time frame what actually happened. So one of them to the Attorney General, and if you look over the asterisk, that was actually for a petition for reinstatement. So in this year, we haven't referred a licensed midwife case for administrative action.
One other context point. For the 7,000, that's based on what total number of licensed physicians and podiatrists?
120.
Yeah, about 126,000.
So again, I think when you start looking at the large number and realize how few cases really come down, and a lot of them turn out they're like Yelp reviews, a patient's dissatisfied, and they're bringing up concerns that, again, the staff is appropriately obligated to evaluate. They do so objectively. So.
Okay. And then if you look at the complaints received, it was 26, and 21 of those were just closed in our central complaint unit.
Just
I
like
don't know if that'll allay any fears, but I completely understand the fear.
It was more a fear, not that somebody was going to be prosecuted or that there was going to be any action taken, but a concern that there was going to be a lot of spinning of wheels that didn't need to be spun because the information was inaccurate or incomplete. Thank you. You've set me to rest there. But I think, are there still people that would like to comment on this? No.
If the motion's being withdrawn, no.
Yeah, Karen withdrew the motion.
Karen did.
Yeah.
I think you have
I had technically.
I have a comment on the agenda item, but not on Karen's motion.
Okay.
I was actually really reassured by the list that Ms. Lowe provided us last week of the reasons for transfer that have been provided so far, just in the narrative form. They actually seem to mostly make sense. You know, the wording might not be wording we like, but the reasons seemed appropriate. And Ms. Lowe provides us with that lovely list of complaints and investigations at every MAC. And so I was wondering if you'd be able to provide some kind of feedback to us about the forms at each MAC meeting, or something, so that we can see what's coming in, and if there's a particular area of concern at an aggregate level, whether we think that there's just a misunderstanding of why midwives as a group are transferring, or just some kind of like summary aggregate like you do with the investigations and complaints. I think that would help, like in this early period of figuring out what kind of data we're going to be getting, help us all feel more reassured.
Yeah, I would like to encourage you to do that. In addition, if you could, as you provide that data, if you could tell us whether any investigations were opened based on a form as opposed to a complaint, so that we can just kind of that's working.
We can provide statistics on the number of reports that we are receiving. I don't see an issue with that. However, if the medical board is using that information to investigate or look into the situation further, that information is not public information. It's not public information until formal action is being taken. So at that level, I don't think I can say 48 reports were submitted and we're investigating 48 of those, because that is not public information at that time.
But once there's an action created, then you could tell us.
If there was formal action being taken, such as an accusation being filed, if we were referring it to the AG's office to take, administrative action, that at that point is when it would become public information, and that could be shared with you.
So in this, I'm looking at the midwifery program enforcement statistics, and you do let us know how many complaints were received, whether they were licensed midwives or unlicensed midwives. We couldn't know.
It's through an end date.
Right, it's through an end date, but some of them are closed, some of them are still open. I don't understand why we couldn't know whether it was complaint driven or form driven. Okay.
I mean, we would have to know that there wouldn't be a way to identify the person involved, and given the small number, that could be an issue. So we'll have to think about it.
Okay. We can definitely continue to let you know how many forms were received. Okay, great.
And the reasons
Leslie,
for
did you have a
transfers?
comment?
A comment.
State your name first
My name
for
is
the record.
Leslie Nelson. I'm a licensed midwife. And the law does not state that any names have to be on this form. That states that the board can come up with a form. So I am requesting that there not be any names on this form.
Okay, I'll comment now.
So wait, as far as the process goes, legal counsel, my understanding is that this is not an opportunity for conversation. This is an opportunity to hear public comment and not to act on public comment. Is that not correct, Ms. Webb?
Well, I mean, I think that Ms. Nelson was commenting on an item that we've been discussing, so.
No, she was suggesting, I thought, no, she was
She was
it
just
sounded to me
asking
like
that
she was
names not
making,
be, she's making a comment to have names
as long
not
as
be
it's a
put on
comment
them.
and not a recommendation. Okay.
So the legal reason supervision was removed is that it had A through F after it, saying for removal, the privilege of legal removal of supervision, this and this and this should happen. Let's say the board forms number F. If we water down A through F so much, we could go back and say, well, why did we do that? We removed supervision and we asked for these things to protect the consumers in exchange. And if we water down a form so much, where it's a form at one point that looked like it was going to report on nothing, that would be just highly disappointing, and I don't think in the intent of the law. When we helped create this law with CAM, it was really for good data. We didn't think that maybe all the hospital outcomes were being reported on the LMAR. So we really wanted this data so we could educate consumers, so we could educate midwives, so we could educate physicians. I think one danger of not putting the name on the form is you're going to get all the lay midwives in there, because the hospitals are going to report on lay midwives or unattended births or physician births, and so it's going to be a big pot. And you could imagine how that pot might be skewed. I think this form needs, the intent of the law is that it needs to have something on it that's of importance to report. And if it just has nothing, that really wasn't in the spirit of the law.
But my motion is that this be a temporary removal until we get the form worked out
but
and
you
the
removed your-
process worked out.
You
It
tabled,
isn't-
you
Yeah.
withdrew your motion, so
I
that we're
don't
done
think
now.
she officially,
I
I don't think
did
she
not
officially did.
withdraw my
But
motion.
may I say
Whoa,
one
whoa. Wait a second. Okay.
May I say one final comment?
Yeah.
I think in a medical community that we hope you collaborate with, I would hope you all know that physicians are reported on everything, almost to the point on how many times we visit the restroom during our hospital shift. But I want to really, I mean, that's pushing it, but it's our episiotomy rates, it's our vaginal delivery rates, it's our C-section rates, it's every adverse or near adverse outcome goes through hospital peer review. We have everything reported on with our names attached to it, and soon that's going to be all public. So I would encourage you not to be shy of that. That's something that we accept on a day-to-day basis. And it does put a little bit of suspicion into the people looking on and saying, why don't you want to report under names?
History.
I know,
That's why.
but
Don't
we're
let history hold us back from
Okay,
moving
yeah.
I
forward.
don't-
Let's.
I'm not saying that, I'm saying temporary.
Okay, wait.
Guys, come on.
I need to know,
Temporary,
Miss Ehrlich,
yes.
I heard you withdraw your motion.
I did not.
She delayed it.
I asked that it be
Did I miss
tabled
that?
when we were talking about it earlier. I asked that it be put back on the table when we began this presentation. So my motion is, as far as I know,
Right.
on the floor.
After I provided my
Wait a
update
second.
and with the discussions of the changes that the board was going to be taking as soon as possible, including moving the names to the second page, adding a couple clarifying items to the text, you removed your motion based on me providing what we were going to be
That's exactly
doing.
what I heard as well. So
That
we've
is-
all been
that is
working
not my
on,
intention.
okay. We've all been working under the assumption that your
I
motion
think
was
you said that you
removed,
took
so-
it off the table.
I
You
meant-
have
I
met
meant
something
to bring
different.
it from the table, from being
Okay,
tabled
okay,
back
so we s-
to this
So
body.
you didn't have an intention to remove your motion?
I used the incorrect
Do we still have a s-
language.
Do we still have a second on the motion, or do I need to ask for that again so that we can take a vote on it? Because I think I think we've discussed it to death.
Yes, I believe so.
There was no second.
Can I
I used
clarify
incorrect-
whether you
I did
intend
not
to go?
intend to remove my motion. I did not intend
So do you have
to
a second to the
take it
motion?
back. As far as I know, there was a second when we talked about it earlier, and then it got put on the table. I don't know who the
So
second
would the
was.
maker of the second remove the second, and then it can die for lack of a second?
I don't know who made the second.
So how about if I table the motion? Can I have a opinion from legal if that's now a precedent?
I do not want to be the obstruction here. I just
Then remove your
want
motion.
Just
to
remove the
make
motion,
this
Karen.
somewhat clear. I did
No
not
more
ask that
clarity.
it, I did not ask that it be removed
Okay.
prior to this moment.
Do you want to move forward with your motion?
Yes, actually, I'd like us to vote. I would.
Well, we need a second on the motion.
I'll second it
There was one.
so that we can move forward. I've seconded it
That's
now.
all.
Is there any further public comment?
CAM actually supports the names being on the forms. And the reason that we do is because we want good data and we want it to be able to be verified. And if we're giving good care like we claim we are, then we have nothing to be concerned about. We're going to have good data. And if there's problems, we're going to see where it's happening and we're going to be able to do something about it. And that was the intention of the form in the first place. So we support the names being on the form.
So I'm going to call the
Thank
question.
you.
Because that will move this forward. I'm calling the question, you can vote on the motion. Call the question.
Okay, so any further comment? Okay, all those in favor
Of removing.
of removing the names, of making the recommendation to remove the names? All opposed? Aye.
I'm abstaining on my motion.
I didn't hear.
I oppose.
You oppose? Ms.
Oppose.
Marceline? Oppose. Okay, so the motion is defeated.
Thank you.
Shall I move on?
My blessing, by the way. Thank you, Ms. Lowe.
Okay. So the agenda item, I'm going to move on to the interested parties meeting regarding the discussion of the certified nurse midwife pathway to licensed midwife licensure. Before I get into the details of the interested parties meeting, we would like to clearly express that this request to obtain a pathway for certified nurse midwives to obtain licensure as a licensed midwife in California was not made by the board nor board staff, nor was it a requirement of Assembly Bill 1308. So I want to make that very clear. The request was brought up during MAC meetings by the members, as well as been brought up by the certified nurse midwifery community and the licensed midwifery community. So the hope, the board, first of all, the board, prior to moving forward with any regulations, we try to obtain a consensus from all parties involved. Part of the purpose of the interested parties meeting, there was interest on this topic. We've held an interested parties. We've gotten some feedback on it. We've had a lot of discussion, suggestions, requests for this item. But it is our hope today at this meeting that we can, after holding the interested parties meeting, after having today's meeting, that we can clearly have it identified what action is needed to take on this. So that is the board's perspective on this at this point. So I want to make it clear that we need to know what we're doing with this to move forward. So with that said, I'll go into a little bit more detail on what occurred during the interested parties meeting. During the meeting, the topic of the equivalency of licensure requirements between California licensed midwives and certified nurse midwives was discussed. Board staff provided a side-by-side comparison of the licensing requirements for the two licenses. We've provided you a copy of that document for your review. It's also available on the table if anyone needs a copy of it. So based on the research that board staff conducted, it indicated that the licensing requirements for the two are equivalent and that those required for LMs are equally met by a certified nurse midwife in California. Also, board staff would support the idea of adding additional language to the regulation to indicate that a valid and current California certified nurse midwife license would be satisfactory evidence to meet the requirements for licensure as a licensed midwife in California. During the meeting, there was discussion regarding the examination requirements between the two. And to clarify, a licensed midwife is required to take and pass the North American Registry of Midwives examination, as this is the exam that's been adopted by the board. It doesn't specifically indicate that NARM is a requirement in regulation or statute. Certified nurse midwives are required to be registered nurses prior to obtaining CNM certification, and their examination requirements have already been met by the requirements set forth by the RN laws and regulations. The board's opinion is that as RNs are required to take and pass the National Council licensure examination prior to obtaining RN licensure, this would meet the requirement, the examination requirements of an LM. Should the board pursue the option of adding language to regulation to indicate that a California certified nurse midwife license would satisfy the licensure requirements, the board's opinion is that the CNM would not be required to take the NARM exam, and that was brought up during the interested parties meeting, so we wanted to clarify.
Could you just restate that bit about the RN licensure, because I didn't quite get all of that.
So in order to obtain certified nurse midwifery certification in California through the RN board, that certified nurse midwife must already hold an RN license. And so in order for them to have CNM certification, they have taken and passed the examination requirement for licensure.
As an RN.
As an RN.
Which has nothing in it about midwifery.
Right. That's correct.
Correct. But on top of that, their education programs for certified nurse midwifery would cover the same topics, which is outlined in these documents and has been verified through the education programs, that they are trained in the same areas as a licensed midwife.
But there's no examination in place for certified nurse midwives to show that they actually know what they were taught in school. Am I understanding that correct? That there's no examination in California for someone who holds an RN license to become a CNM. they only have to show that they've been to CNM school. Am I understanding that right?
No, they have a licensing exam, the ACME.
They have a different exam, don't they? I mean,
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Yes.
I don't know the specific exam that is required, I'll be honest with you, for a CNM. I don't have that. I know that the examination requirement is met by the CNM requirements, which is outlined in our document, but I don't have the specific requirement, except to say that they are equally, the requirements are equally met.
Well, they're equally trained, but what I'm trying to ascertain here is there an exam beyond the RN licensing exam that grants them certified nurse midwife status in California, or is there not? Because if there's not, I think we have a problem if we're just going on their RN board exams.
I am fairly certain that the CNMs must pass a CNM licensing exam.
Well, I certainly thought so too, but that's not what I'm hearing from Ms. Lowe. So
Right.
I'm just trying to clarify.
I'm saying that I don't know if the specific examination, what the exam is.
I just want to be clear when you write the regulations that
It doesn't say that the BRN exam is enough.
yeah, exactly. That just the exam to become an RN should not be sufficient, regardless of whether they've completed an educational program. They have to be able to validate what they learned in the educational program via an exam as a midwife.
The language put forth so far doesn't speak to that at all. It requires a valid and current California CNM license.
Good. Thank you.
Right. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm hearing from Ms. Lowe is that what the board's understanding is that the examination requirement is met when the person takes her RN exam.
No, it says in here it's an additional 12 months, I thought.
Ms. Lowe, that is how it sounded in the report.
So,
Yeah, so I'm
the board's perspective is that if somebody holds a California Certified Nurse Midwifery registration through the BRN board, based on that license alone, they would meet the requirements for a California licensed midwife.
Yes.
I understand that.
The discussion ensued at the interested parties meeting on if they would be required to take the NARM exam.
Right.
And
No, I understand that. And I think based on the interested parties meeting and the information we received there, I don't think they need to take the NARM. What I don't want to have put in regulation is that their RN licensing exam is sufficient if they've also had.
No, the board would be more looking to say a certified nurse midwife license in California meets the requirements to obtain a licensed midwife license in California.
Okay,
As a
so
pathway or
dry.
as an automatic?
as an automatic, as a pathway.
As a
If you have
pathway.
if you hold a valid CNM,
You would have to
you
apply,
could get
though.
you
would
can
have
get
to
an
apply.
LM
Correct. You
without
would have to
taking
meet
an exam.
the other requirements for licensure as well.
So you're not planning on putting anything in there about their actual examinations?
No.
Is that- okay.
And when I say meet the other requirements as well, that would be submitting your application, the payment, the fingerprinting, answering the specific questions required for an application. But that certified nurse midwifery license would be the method of applying for a midwife.
So if you take a look at the front page, it says that they take an extra year of courses.
No, I know. I'm not
Okay.
worried about the courses. Did they test after they took the courses? That's what I wanted to know.
It just had to do with some of the language that Ms. Lowe was speaking.
I understand. I apologize for that.
Yeah.
We do have additional
Okay.
information that they would be required to take a certification examination prior
Thank
to
you.
obtaining that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we got it. We're good. Sorry.
So
I
in
don't
other
mean to
words,
be a pain, but-
essentially, any CNM may apply for LM licensure as reciprocity, with reciprocity. But she still has to apply. Yeah.
Be very, very careful what you're hearing here. What you're hearing is that there is an equivalency as far as education, but that does not grant them an automatic licensure.
No, that they have to apply.
They have to apply, but
Any
so it's a pathway.
reciprocity
So
that
it's
has to apply.
it's a pathway, is
Yeah.
what it is.
Whenever
Okay.
there's reciprocity, the person has to apply.
I'd be
Use the
careful of the
term.
word reciprocity because it doesn't always. To me, it
Yeah,
doesn't mean that.
it's just an alternate pathway. I
That has
think,
been
Karen.
my understanding, but I
means
take it
Like
automatic.
the
back.
challenge is an alternate pathway.
back.
Reciprocity to me means automatic.
Okay.
So I'd be careful, that's all I'm saying.
So we're good now. I'm sorry, Ms. Lowe. Do you want to continue?
What happens after they are granted a license? Do they have to give up their CNM license? Do they choose
No.
one, or are they dual license?
So that discussion has also occurred, and there's been some findings where, and it's not finalized, obviously, because this is not in law or reg, but at the time of accepting a patient, it would have to be documented which license the individual would be using, and that would determine which regulatory agency would be responsible for the oversight. Currently, there would be no flip-flopping in the middle of the patient's care. So whatever the patient was signed on under would have to remain throughout the care for the patient.
Okay.
Could you conceive of a practice made up of one licensed midwife and one CNM, where that one patient would be taking care from each of them?
I think that this definitely is going to have more discussion, and it's obviously not finalized or anywhere near that. There's a lot of different scenarios that can come up with that idea, but that's what is in the process right now, or what's being discussed.
It was an excellent overview. It was very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so that does conclude my update on the interested parties. I would like to say that, again, the information that's being provided and is still coming in is going to be reviewed by legal counsel and board staff, and we can provide an additional update. But again, we do need to determine what action is going to be needed for this specific item, if possible.
Okay. Is there any public comment on the CNM portion of the interested parties meeting? Any council member input? Ms. Davis?
CAM supports staff's recommendation on this issue to go to the full board, which I think you said was the next step.
Correct.
Thank you.
And I just want to add that
I didn't hear.
Sorry.
I
She
didn't
just said
understand what you said.
that CAM supports creating this pathway.
Moving forward with the pathway.
Okay.
Ms. Marceline?
Well, I just wanted to say the more midwives, the better. We need lots more. So
Thank
more
you.
pathways means more midwives.
Seeing no further comments, we're going to move on to the program update. Agenda item 9.
Okay. Agenda item 9A, and not that I want to sound like a broken record at every MAC meeting, but I basically do have the same information to provide for the Breeze update. We are still working on updates to the Breeze system to allow for online applications and renewals to be submitted electronically. At past meetings, we anticipated that it may occur sometime in August, September, the end of the year. However, I don't really anticipate that happening until possibly the beginning of next year, based on the amount of work that is being done on several different areas for the board. That has not come up for testing, so I don't anticipate it being released anytime soon. During the full board meeting in July, a Breeze update was provided by the department and indicated that they will be working on a global cleanup effort for the online system that's used for verifying licenses, submitting applications, complaints, and renewals, which
is that through Breeze, or is that
is through the Breeze system?
The verifying of licenses
Correct.
as well?
Correct. So part of the problem, or I won't call it a problem, but some of the concern that has been raised is that when you log into the Breeze system, you click Access Breeze. You can do that from our homepage. When you get there, there's a login screen that has verify a license, login information, file a complaint. It's confusing to our consumers. It's confusing to our licensees. So what they're looking to do is to have a cleaned up homepage that will clearly indicate that you can verify a license without creating a user account or logging in. It'll also remove some of the clicks necessary to get to verify a license.
Good.
So the department is taking that on and is working on it. So hopefully we'll see something in the near future.
Could I just make one comment about the license lookup? I did it recently for someone I knew had a surrendered license. And when you type the name in, the first screen that you get is their name, their license number, and I think maybe the year that it was issued. It doesn't say suspended, revoked, in good standing, nothing. And unless you click on the name, you don't have any idea. And many people are not going to make that click. And my recommendation would be that as soon as you put their name in and you get the page that has their license number, it should say in good standing, suspended, revoked, whatever the status of the license is, because it's a problem.
I can see your side of it, and I understand where you're coming from. However, I see concern with that, having that status there, is that someone may only look at that then and not obtain any of the public documents or any additional status information that can be included on a license record. So that screen is used to narrow down your search results for you to then select the individual and go into their profile. The profile not only contains their issue expiration date, it also includes their address of record, if there's been any past disciplinary action, and so forth. And if we add additional data elements to that first screen, I believe it would cause more reason not to go in and get more information. So
we can talk later.
I have another thought about the sign-in stuff. I've been on the license verification recently. On the old system, if I clicked on a county, I would get a list of all the midwives in that county with their addresses. And I hear what you're saying about perhaps not their addresses, but what about their towns or cities? Because some people might use that page to locate midwives in their area. If you've got a fairly geographically large county, it's not easy to figure out from Breeze at this point who might be in her specific area.
So I will take your concerns back to the department. We meet regularly. And so I will bring your concerns up and get a response from them directly on their feelings on that. Are there any other questions on the Breeze system? Okay, so I'll move on a little bit. I have some more information on Breeze.
Okay.
For the Breeze system, there is some good news in that we have been able to create statistical reports from the system. This has allowed us to complete the licensing and enforcement statistics, which I will go into more detail on, but we are seeing progress in being able to obtain that data from the system and validate it and trust that the information is correct. So that's good news. We continue to report issues to the department regularly for any issues that we are finding or are brought to our attention. We are reporting it. As mentioned previously, the process is time consuming, but it will eventually make for a better system for our future. So if we all need to hang in there a little bit, it will get better. And that concludes my update on Breeze, and I can move on to the statistics now.
Okay, is there any public comment on the Breeze item? Any council comment? Okay.
Okay, so page 23 of your packets provides the licensing statistics for the midwifery program. We were able to provide the stats for the reporting period that was not included in the last meeting's MAC packets. So we've gone back to an additional quarter that we would not normally report on today, but we've also provided the stats for the last 2 quarters of the fiscal year. As the fiscal year is ended, we've provided a yearly total, which you can see for the 2013-14 fiscal year. And the data is pretty consistent with the last few years. We continue to receive a steady amount of applications quarterly. It's a pretty average amount that we're obtaining. And our licensing analyst, Anna Marie, has been working to ensure that all applications are reviewed in a timely manner and licenses are issued as quickly as possible. So that desk is up to date and current, and contact is being made quickly with any midwives submitting applications. So we're in pretty good shape in the licensing program for this department.
I have a question here.
Okay.
You say 310 current, 37 delinquent. That makes 347. Is that indeed the number that we're up to on LMs? And what about if...
I know we're up to 400 because I talked to somebody who's got that number.
Right. The license numbers are not reflective of how many are in a current status. This only provides renewed and current and delinquent. So there's also going to be the midwives that are in a canceled status or deceased status or revoked status. This is Right. So for primary statuses, renewed, delinquent, canceled, revoked, we're only showing you the renewed and current and the delinquent.
Why? Why not also the suspended, the delinquent, the deceased? Which I still know that there are people who have died who are still listed there. I guess nobody has sent in their
They'll be
death
delinquent
certificates.
soon.
Pardon?
Sorry.
I didn't hear that.
They'll be delinquent soon.
Yeah. So if the MAC feels that this is a necessary data element or a requested data element for the meeting, we can take that back and see what our options are for providing that. If it is a recommendation by the MAC, we could
Is
look
that
into it.
something the MAC would like to have? Suspended, revoked, do we?
Yeah, for completeness, yeah.
Yeah.
Does it have any administrative burden for staff?
Yes. It is a time-consuming process to obtain statistics. So it may be down the road, and possibly this is something that we can take into consideration. Down the road, once we have at the click of a button statistics from the Breeze system, it should be something fairly simple to provide to you.
Okay.
Right
So that's
now,
what I'm-
basically, we're able to get the data out, but we have to manually go through and make all of the calculations for the most part.
I will withdraw my request until such time as Breeze gives you a button.
Okay, and we'll continue to work on the stats to make sure that we have the capability of providing that information. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Were there any other questions on the licensing stats?
So the numbers are up above 400. Do you know where we're at on that, give or take?
I'm not positive what the last license number is we've issued, but I can tell you that at the end of the fiscal year, we had 310 in a renewed and current status that were able to practice within California.
So we don't know what the most recent license number is that's been issued, give or take. I won't hold you to it.
And
Thank you.
everyone heard that, 403 approximately license number. There are some license numbers that have been skipped though for whatever reason. So keep that in mind. That's not an accurate portrayal of the number of licenses that have been issued.
Okay.
Now we have to know why they were skipped.
System error, it was entered, a duplicate, something like that, where we had to back it out.
So you didn't just skip,
can't
number
reuse the
66 or number 13 or something.
Right. So, okay, so I will move on to the enforcement stats, if okay. So as I mentioned, we were able to provide the back stats that we hadn't been able to provide before, so that's included in your packet. And
It is revised.
sorry, let me pull that. So in the MAC packets that we originally mailed out to you, we had not been able to provide the data yet. We were able to get that updated information and provided you a copy. Should be a loose document.
I have so many loose things.
Here, I can give you mine.
Here, no, she can have mine. Here you go.
I got one. Thank you.
Okay. So that information was also updated on the website for the meeting materials, just so everyone knows. So as you can see on the chart, the number of complaints submitted has increased since last fiscal year from 21 to 26 during this fiscal year. I'd like to point out that I know there's a lot of concern on the amount of complaints filed and so forth, but there could be some reasons for the increase, and I'll just speculate that not only has the complaints increased, so has the licensing midwifery population. There's also now the ability to submit complaints online. So that has allowed consumers easier access for submitting complaints. And I imagine that for all of our license types that we will continue to see the complaint numbers increase based on that easy access for submitting complaints. So keep that in mind as we move on using the Breeze system. You will also see during the year that only 2 complaints were referred to the field for investigation, which also indicates that although complaints are submitted regularly, it does not necessarily result in an investigation being opened on them. Also of interest during the fiscal year, it was already mentioned, but we did refer 1 case to the Attorney General's office. However, that case was not necessarily disciplinary action. It was a petition for reinstatement that is required to go to the AG's office for further action. So there were no cases referred for criminal action. Are there any questions regarding the enforcement?
I'm trying to understand this. So I'm looking at total number of open investigations. There are 2, one for a licensed midwife, one for an unlicensed midwife. And then, okay, never mind.
And also
I'm trying to
the number of complaints closed were not necessarily the same complaints that were received.
Got it.
Makes sense.
So
Could be from the year
it could be a previous year or previous quarter.
I just want to make a quick observation. Earlier, there was discussion that there was approximately 125,000 licensed professionals covered by the medical board, which generates about 7,500 complaints a year. I just did a quick check. That's around 6%. If you actually look at the number of licensed midwives and the number of complaints, you know what? It's around 6%. So I think that's heartening. Now, what's also interesting that of those 6% of total complaints, actually a third of them were for non-licensed midwives. It goes back to Constance's comment. I think the clearer the data in time, I know processes are bad, I'm not going to reopen that whole thing, but I think this really shows that individuals in this room could have a lot of pride in what they do. These numbers of investigations for them are only about 4% of the total. So there's a lot of good data, even among this data that's being collected.
thank you for that perspective. I do appreciate it.
Okay, so there's also other statistics provided that you can review. But that does conclude my update on the stats, so I can move on if there are no other questions.
Anybody have any questions from the audience, from the council? Alrighty then.
Okay. Right, so the agenda item 9D, if you can turn to page 25 of your packets. As you can see, the 2013 California Licensed Midwife Annual Report, the LMAR, has been completed and the summary has been provided from OSHPD. The report has also been posted on the board's website, so that is available now for viewing. As you can see on the report, out of 330 anticipated reports to be completed, only 259 were done. That's resulting in 71 going unreported. That equals a 78% submission rate, which per OSHPD is the lowest recorded compliance rate so far since the data collection program was began.
Do you know what it was prior, the rate?
I don't know the specific percentage. These findings are very concerning, not only to the board, but should also be of concern to the midwifery community. Current law indicates that failure to meet the reporting requirement will result in the midwife being unable to renew his or her license without first submitting the required data. The law also states, though, that the board shall not take any other action against the licensee for failure to comply with the law. So it really leaves us without any type of enforcement at this point for midwives who are not submitting the data. The concern is that although the renewal cannot be completed, the data has to still be submitted to OSHPD in order for them to renew. The problem with that is that when a midwife comes up to renew their license, it could be 2 years after the data is due. They then provide that data to OSHPD. However, that information is never taken in, is never added to the report. So that information is not necessarily accurate, what we're looking at. So next year, board staff will work to provide additional outreach regarding completing the LMAR. However, we currently send out a reminder email, a reminder note. We follow up with letters to those midwives who have not completed their report saying it needs to be done before you renew. But what's going to happen is if the results of those that are not being submitted continue to go in this fashion, the board may be required to pursue legislative changes so that we can enforce the report being completed. Obviously, we don't want to go down that route, and that's why I think outreach is needed, not only by the board, by the MAC, but also the midwifery community to get the word out to all of those individual licensed midwives.
330. I want to compute.
Okay, so maybe this will help a little bit. I'm not sure. We took that list of 71 individuals that did not submit the report, as we're required to follow up with them. We didn't have a lot of time to analyze the data, but from the time that we did have, the information that I can share with you is that 8 of those licenses were issued in December of 2013. So 8 individuals did not submit the report. And 4 of those were actually issued in the last week of December. So maybe that is something that when we send you your license, that we're providing you some outreach saying, regardless of when you're licensed during that year, you're still required to submit data, even if you have never practiced yet.
Even if you saw nobody. 'Cause
Correct.
there is a way to do that. I
Right.
know because I've been doing it that way.
So I did think that was of interest. There were only 8 though, for those that were, again, right. But that's almost, that's a pretty big number
Approaching
out of
10%,
71.
yeah.
So of note, there was also 6 of them, 6 licenses that had been expired since 2010, 5 that have been in a delinquent status. One that knows of a midwife being deceased that we're still reflecting an active license, delinquent license, to notify the board so that we can update the information.
But we were told when we asked this question before that we could inform you, but nothing would be done
Correct.
until the
That's still the
family
case.
themselves sent in a death certificate.
Us that a midwife is deceased at least can allow our staff to contact the family or through the address of record that we have on file. We can't automatically update a record based on someone telling us that a person's deceased, but we can provide some follow-up on the information
You
you
can't even
give.
get it from off vital records?
Public records, vital records.
Staff time, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you get it that way if you have staff time?
There are certain data collection agencies that we can directly obtain information that can be used. So we need to be notified. If we can obviously verify it through our sources, then we'll do that. If not, we at least can reach out to the family. Okay. So back to kind of the breakdown on these possible reasons. From 2011 and 20 to 2013, I provide you the breakdown, but that equals 17 additional licensees that were in delinquent status. We also found that 5 of the ones that did not report were listed with an out-of-state address. So those alone are 30 licensees. And so that would leave 41 who have not completed the report.
There's 20 that are not reflected as current and renewed status, because there's 310 current and renewed, and there's 330 that we're expected to report.
Correct. And that's because the data is provided to OSHPD at the beginning of the year for the past year for anyone that is in a current or delinquent status. So they take that. However, the information I'm looking at now is based on their current status right now. So it could have been delinquent then and now canceled. It could have been expired or renewed and current, and now it's gone into a different status. So the data has changed, but what this is showing is that of those 71, 30 of them possibly have somewhat of an excuse. However, they still need to submit the data, even to show
excuse.
Exactly. The 41, we can't find any rhyme or reason why they may not have submitted the data. Just to give a little insight on that number.
At the risk of being very unpopular, you could make it a little more difficult for them to renew their license when they didn't submit their data.
They can't currently they cannot renew their license if the data is not submitted. A hold is placed.
Well, I know, but you guys have been really sweet about giving them the forms they need in a really fast way. I'm just suggesting maybe, you're busy.
Yeah.
It can't work that way.
And what if somebody who has not submitted her data is told that her license is on hold, is suspended until such time as she does submit?
Well, the license is not necessarily suspended, and I don't want to use that word that suspension is occurring. If a midwife, first of all, a renewal goes out approximately 90 to 120 days prior to expiration. So if they send in their renewal and we have a hold on it for completing the LMAR for the previous year, the license, that period of time, we can get back to that licensee and say, you still need to complete your LMAR. But there's still that 90 days until it will come up for expiration date. So there is time for them to complete it before it ever expires.
Right.
And we do work one-on-one with a lot of the midwives that will call in and want to know why their license never renewed. And we'll look back and see that they're missing previous years also. So it's not only that we're looking at 2013 data, but if they
Right.
haven't submitted it for the last 3 years, we want them to complete all of it in order to update their renewal. So we do work with them. We provide them either a paper copy of the form that they can use to submit to OSHPD, or we refer them directly to OSHPD if it's an issue of they forgot their password or their login, something like that. They can provide assistance.
I'm just trying to think if there's some way of getting the submission rate improved.
I think
through-
it's outreach and letting the midwifery community know what the impact is of them not submitting their report timely. Is that your LMAR reports will never be accurate if the information is not provided prior to the cutoff.
It'll never be accurate anyway.
Dr. Byrne?
And the LMR reports are the data that feeds the OSHPD
Yes.
for birth
Yes.
data. So is there awareness among those who don't report? You don't know this probably. Is there awareness among those who don't report that perhaps they are undercutting the entire community? That if this is roughly 10% of providers, it's going to show statewide 10% fewer out-of-hospital planned births than actually
Correct.
deserve to be credited.
And that is why we wanted to provide some emphasis on this.
Yeah.
And I personally was not aware that this is what the process is, that you still have to submit it, but it's never going to get calculated into those results.
Because OSPOD
So-
won't go back and rectify 2 year.
No.
They're already lagged.
And part of that reason is that the summary that's provided from OSHPD to the medical board is aggregate data. So we don't obtain the licensed midwife's name or the patient's or any of that information. So the problem for them to add in that information is we already have this list of 71 individuals that didn't report that we're going to provide follow-up. Well, now we have the licensed midwife call us to renew, and we say you haven't finished your LMAR. We refer them to OSHPD, they do their LMAR, and now LMAR provides us with a new result. We, in theory, could determine who that midwife was based on the late submission and being able to narrow it down. So that is their reasoning why they don't go back and add into that data.
Any information if this is a scattered group of individuals or concentrated in some urban or rural population areas? Any specific data that could help target
We looked up
education?
We looked up all of the 71 individuals, and they were throughout California, major cities, rural areas. I could not see any rhyme or reason based on our quick review of it.
So, and again, there might be blind spots we have. It might be barriers they had to entering the data or they thought they had data in. So I'm not making any value judgments, but it does undercut the ability to show the value to the
So
society.
now I have a question for legal. Is there a reason that who these 71 people are can't be public information?
I know that the law does state that it's an aggregate form to us for the
But
results.
it doesn't say anything about who doesn't report.
There may be some protections under the Information Practices Act.
Could you
It's also
research it
in
and get back to us
process. I would be happy to do research and get back to you on that.
because if we could know who it is, it would make it a whole lot easier to encourage them to submit their forms on time.
It's an opportunity to improve and for feedback. Nothing punitive.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, not
this
in a
one was
punitive way,
absolutely
but
nothing.
you know, we can't. It's really difficult to send out a blanket. You know, come on, guys, get with it. It would be much easier to target it.
Well, that being said, Cam will do outreach and see if we can get the midwives to understand why it would be valuable for them to help us get good data.
Yeah.
So we will do that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
How about
And
calling it
so
the
I'll look
best
for something
possible
from you.
data? How about the best possible data?
Yeah.
Rather than good.
Are you finished with this? I'm sorry. Ms. Lau, are you done with the
Yes,
report?
that does conclude my update.
Okay. Are there any other comments?
Oh, I'm sorry, that
Oh.
does not conclude my update.
Oh, okay. We'll
Hold
let
on.
you finish then.
Let me get back to where I was. So there were a few items that were Of note, changes in the report. Let me get there. The total numbers for fetal demise and infant demise did increase this year. Wasn't a significant amount, but it is of note. Also, the data reported for Section P, get there. Complications leading to maternal or infant mortality. For infants, those did increase as well. So sections E and P, of note, the data did increase. The rest was somewhat consistent. So comparing that to the 2012 data. And that does conclude my update.
What was I just going to ask?
Questions?
Can you use the microphone because we are webcasting? Thank you.
You mentioned that the number of fetal and infant deaths increased, but I'm wondering if the number of overall births
Yes.
did as well.
They did increase as well. And that is taking into consideration the 71 that did not report, it still increased. So from 2012, give me 1 second here. 2012, the number of planned out-of-hospital births at the onset of labor was 2,784. And in this report, it indicates 3,028. So that did increase, as well as the number of completed births in an out-of-hospital setting increased. All of the previous years that we have available are online if anyone wants to do their own comparisons. Just putting that out there.
I wonder, are there paper reports still coming in, or are they all on computer?
There still is the option of providing a paper copy. That's if we receive information that a midwife wants one, we can.
Is that happening?
It happens on a rare occasion, but it does happen.
Yeah. Okay.
Are you done now?
Yes.
Any public comment on this item? Any council comment? All right. Seeing none, we're moving forward. Agenda items for the next Midwifery Advisory Council meeting, which I believe is December 4th.
Correct.
All right. So in addition to an update on the midwifery program, are there any additional items to be considered? Well, we need updates on the task force for the board packet. We need updates on how we're moving forward with the implementation of AB 1308. We need an update on whether or not the board accepted the assistant language. Karen Ehrlich and I are hoping to have some report available regarding changes to the LMAR to make it more readable.
And more accurate.
And accurate, yeah. Anyone else have something to add there? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand from the CNM agenda item what was the action the board, the council was going to take, because I know Ms. Lowe had requested an action, and then I'm not sure what happened with that.
Oh. I didn't hear you ask for an action. Do you need us to take an action so that you can take it to the board or not?
The board is looking for, we need to know what we're going to be doing with this at this point. We're trying to obtain a consensus from all parties involved, but there are still quite a bit of issues, so we were hoping to get some clarification.
With the CNM thing?
The pathway, correct.
Okay.
Basically, it's still under discussion at board staff and council level. We're getting questions from CNMs who, I mean, they're really asking about toggling between their CNM and LM licensure. That gives us pause for concern. And for
I thought you'd pretty adequately addressed that.
We thought so, but there's still an ongoing discussion, and we haven't decided whether we'll be moving forward with it, and if so, what it will look like.
So then, you're not looking for an action from us at this meeting to move it forward. So then that means we need an agenda item for you to give us a report on what's happening with that in December, correct?
I would,
Yeah, that's appropriate.
I would like to ask Ms. Webb if we can hear, perhaps at the next meeting, what some of the issues specifically are about this moving between licenses, because at least one of the CNMs I know who is considering getting an LM believes that there is absolutely no issue. So I would like to have some examples to be able to really understand what the concerns are about this, having the dual licensure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we have an agenda item to review the document we talked about earlier? Right.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
And the assistant language update, the LMAR from Karen and I, the CNM, the LM thing, an update on AB 1308 regulations and processes. And
We'll also need an update for the interested parties meeting that we'll be holding in the next month or two to discuss defining maternal disease or complication.
all right. Any council members have anything to add to this? Nice list.
We are anticipating another interested parties meeting around assistance. Was it the assistance?
No,
An additional.
around 20 implementation of 2507 for
Right.
what constitutes normal, basically.
Correct. And there is no date set for that. I want to make that very
Right.
clear.
Is that's the only anticipated interested parties meeting at this point?
Yes, but
If additional feedback is necessary for the reporting form, that may be added to the agenda, but it's unclear now if it will be required.
Thank you.
Well, I also wanted to know, are we having regulation about what a required referral consists of? Because there's a lot of variation in what that could look like. We recently had a midwife in our area who made 3 referrals for somebody who had reached 42 weeks. All of the providers declined to take on this woman, and she ended up with an unassisted birth by herself a week later. These are the kind of issues that will come up.
Yes.
And if we don't define what a referral means, I mean, we're required to make them, but nobody's required to take them. And neither is the woman that we are referring
required
to take them.
In particular, she isn't.
Yeah.
And at that point, then we have to abandon her according to
Yeah.
our law.
And how ethical is that?
Yeah.
Where does our ethical responsibility and the language that is clearly in here that our primary responsibility is to the people in our care? How do we balance those things, and where is the language to support it? And I think that's really, really important to define clearly, or we're all have our stomachs in knots.
I think what you're asking, Tessie, will be addressed in the interested parties meetings and the promulgation of regulations to implement that portion of 2507. And I think those are really important concerns that we need to be sure we're addressing. In terms of the hospital form, it seems, given the discussion we've had here today, that we do need at least one other interested parties meeting regarding the form, so that, because I think that it's possible we may want additional information elements on that form. And I know that Shannon Smith Crawley last time said that she had to go back to her membership, so we don't have those comments. We don't know what people are submitting to you blind from an interested parties meeting. And I think the board should plan on that, because I think that ultimately we're going to want some regulations in place, if nothing else, than to specify, what the hospital's role is.
I would like, counsel.
Yeah, I do need to make sure that we're clear based on what Ms. Marceline just commented on. There are some things that the regulations we do for 2507 aren't going to touch, and one of them is that if the pregnancy is beyond the 42nd week, that is not a birth that a midwife may attend to. And I know that's not going to feel right for some people, but the law is clear on that. And so please protect your license.
That is clear. However, it also makes it really clear that we're supposed to make a referral and refer her out. And to some people, that would constitute abandonment if no referral was available to her.
Can I ask that one of the items regarding this in December would be if council could give us perhaps some guidance on best practices for how licensed midwives may document their attempts at referral, so at least they are papered and protected in safe harbor, showing that they have taken appropriate professional action.
And the other issue there would also be, do we need to add an element onto the licensed midwifery reporting that says how many people we no, I was going to say abandoned at 42 weeks. Or something that is going to show, where are these people? Where are they going?
May I suggest in the meantime, until the legalities are worked out, that a hospital can never turn someone away like that?
No, they can. They're not in labor.
A hospital will not send a woman home at 42 weeks.
Yes, but will she go?
Well, that's if she, you know, if I were in your situation, I would say at the onset that if you reach 42 weeks gestation, I'm going to refer you to the hospital and help her with that decision. I think one thing, you know, ACOG again is working on their side to try to come up with language. Too bad we couldn't get it in the law. I think if you think of things, and certainly the ones of you that have your own insurance, to share that with the physician that you're referring to will help. Because that's the biggest hurdle.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So to keep us on track, agenda items for next Midwifery Council meeting. Seeing no other additions from council members, I'm going to move to the next agenda item, which is adjournment. Since there's no further public comment or order of business, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.